All right. Again, I'm Jewyl Clarke, and today we are talking about lesson planning and distance learning. And so I'm excited to have those of you who are on here. We just did introductions, but I just started the recording. So at this point, anything that you share with the group will be part of the recording, and this will be available online later for anyone who's interested in finding them. I'm going to go ahead and put the link to the slides in the chat. You can also go to this short link bit.ly/CTE Distance that's here on the slides, and that will take you to our website that has a whole host of resources, including all of our upcoming webinars, and many of those webinars are available afterwards as a video, so you can always watch some of those along the way. There are additional resources across all disciplines also on our COVID-19 site for SDCOE. All right, so I'd like to start out on all my webinars just kind of giving this quick overview of distance learning itself. So what we look at, this came straight from the California Department of Education, and distance learning is instruction when the student and instructor are in different locations. This is part of their COVID-19 support, and so I like this diagram just as we think about what our role is and how we're supporting our students, that we're really thinking about that it's kind of different levels of support that we can provide. So one of the highest levels of support is one-on-one interaction, assistance through an online learning platform. Not all districts have that in place, and sometimes technology is a challenge for both the teacher and the student. So we may also have some online curriculum for students to work on at home. At this point, due to social distancing guidelines, we are not providing computer lab or classroom opportunities, but I do wonder as we phase back into school at some point, whether that may be a piece of that phase. So just having that in the back of our mind is helpful as we think about how we plan. And ultimately, if you are having a hard time getting things to be accessible to your students, paper packets of instructional materials for students to work on at home are an option. I know we have some rural districts where even with hotspots, students can't access the internet from home just because cell service is not enough in order for those hotspots to work. And so, there are some students for whom paper packets are going to be the best option at this point. And so as we look at these different levels of online instruction and non-online instruction, but distance learning, just really think about how we can be at the highest watermark for ourselves, but also remember, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Just get a little bit out there for your students, play around with it, and you'll get more comfortable the more time that you're doing this. So it's not about replacing the exact way and learning objectives that you would have taught in the classroom at this point. It's really about keeping the momentum of learning going and ensuring our students are prepared for next year's learning as well. So that kind of brings me to this idea of the scope of learning. And I think each one of our LEAs, or our districts or charter schools, they have different levels of where they are right now. And some are in the development of what that looks like. So the first question becomes, is this required instruction, or is this what we call enrichment? So a lot of districts are starting with enrichment, which means you may not be grading it. It might just be optional activities. And so we'll see if as you think about the different components of learning, there are some that are a good fit for enrichment if you want to delay and do the required instruction pieces once you can grade. Also thinking about technology and what's available to your students, obviously what hardware they have. I know that particularly in CTE, if you want students to use maybe some free design program that mimics CAD or does graphic design work, Chromebooks may not be enough of a computer to be able to handle those programs. And so that may limit some of the things that you can use, but there are some alternatives. And then thinking about what software your students have access to and you have access to, whether it's Zoom and Google Hangouts, or just really thinking about what online software that they might be utilizing for learning. Also want to think about how much time students will spend in your class per week. If any of you are like me, you've spent hours and hours and hours on Zoom every day, and that's not something that we should replicate for our students. That amount of screen time is not very reasonable. We all know that our engagement gets lower and lower with every hour of Zoom that we participate in. And so it's really ideal to kind of set up this learning playlist, and we'll talk about what that might look like later, that may include a little bit of direct synchronous learning, but also some opportunities for students to work when you're not necessarily all looking at each other through interface like Zoom. The other piece is your own capacity. Like I said, it's about trying to build your capacity, do as much as you can along the way. But if you're working until midnight every day trying to get everything perfect, remember that you need to take care of yourself as well as take care of your students. We want you to be well and healthy. We're all going to be in what we call the stretch zone right now. There's a comfort zone, stretch zone, and panic zone. So we all want to be stretched. We're all trying something new and different. But if you push yourself too far, you get to the panic zone and you really can't manage as much. And so take care of yourself and realize that you are a piece of the puzzle when we talk about what learning can happen with your students. So as you get into lesson planning, first of all, it's really thinking about what are the non-negotiable learning outcomes? What will students need to know to be successful in the next course? So if you're in a sequenced pathway in CTE, then start thinking about what would you hope these students kind of have already developed skills or knowledge that will be a requirement of entering next year. Also remembering that you'll probably be the teacher for next year or be working with that person, and so you'll be able to adjust in the fall based on where your students got this year. But also, if they're going off to their post-secondary choice next year, are there certain things that are non-negotiable about your class that are going to be your priorities? And be okay with doing less than you would have done otherwise. We already know that there are a few weeks of school that at this point, while you're in training and while your district is coming up with a plan and things like that, may already be lost. And so it's really about taking care of yourself and coming up with the best ways to move your students forward in preparation for next year. So once you have some non-negotiable learning outcomes, think about not just like we talked about the hardware and software that came from the school, but what else do they have around the house? What do they have in the virtual community that you wouldn't have necessarily utilized in your classroom? So that might be if you're in culinary, you could easily do a chopped style challenge with what is in your refrigerator today. And so there are some really unique things that you might be able to do that you wouldn't have done in the classroom now that you have students at home. So as much as we can leverage their current experience, that would be a great way to get them learning. We'll also talk a little bit about some additional support that might be needed for students who need accommodations, but your district will also advise you on what that looks like along the way. So at this point, any questions out there from the audience? Great. This is kind of a dense slide. You can go to the sources from the CDE. I like to pull things from the California Department of Education. As dense as their website is, if I can pull a few things that may help people, then I wanted to do that. So when we think about distance learning, you also see these two terms, synchronous and asynchronous. Right now, those of you who are with me in this are part of a synchronous learning experience. We're all here at the same time. We're like synchronized swimmers, where together we move forward at the same moment. Asynchronous learning would be if you are accessing this afterwards, or if you go and if you have an assignment where students can do it on their own. So really thinking about how we mix synchronous and asynchronous is really important. And this just has some things around like what are some of the alternatives that you can do to some of these learning dimensions, as they're calling them. So to transmit knowledge, which is like this expository, you might have a one-way webcast or an online video lecture. So these are two different versions kind of for each one of these types of learning. And really the foundation, which CTE is better at than pretty much any other subject, to be honest, is this idea of the value of their learning. what are students going to do with it later? If you just start giving them digital worksheets, they're not going to be as engaged. They're probably going to copy. Okay, they all know each other's cell phone numbers. They can take pictures and send it around. And so what you really want to do is find ways to create assignments that are meaningful to your students, that have meaning beyond yourself. So it's really building their skills, or maybe their digital presence, or creating portfolio pieces that are going to be meaningful to that student beyond a grade. Also, really harnessing and leveraging their personal interests. You know, as we'll kind of get into, there are opportunities to do things like videos. So, you know, TikTok is really popular right now, and it's these short, 30 seconds to a minute and a half kind of videos. So if you instead can have your students do a mini assignment that mirrors some of the things that they're doing already for fun, and they're learning along the way, you'll get a different level of engagement. And that's something you might not have done when you were in the classroom. Have them go around and create a video, but you might be surprised at what you'll get now that they have a little bit more time on their hands. And with most of our students having cell phones, most likely they can use those to create the video, or if they are given a district device with a webcam, they can use that for a video as well. So let's jump into lesson planning for distance learning. And we talked a little bit about the bigger concepts behind this, but as we get into this, the first thing is to brainstorm and collect resources related to each one of your non-negotiable learning outcomes. So if you have a particular learning outcome that you haven't gotten to yet this year, or that needs to be built out a little bit more deeply, kind of put that up and start brainstorming ideas. What are the resources? What are the articles? Did you find some digital curriculum? How do you learn? How do I learn? I go to YouTube, right? One day I decided I was going to change my own light in the bathroom because my light went out, the whole thing. What did I do? I went on YouTube and I watched somebody else do it and followed their directions. So utilizing the same tools that I would use or you would use, you can put your students into doing that. Industry organizations also have videos that might be accessible, and I'll share with you a resource that's being built out in order to bring more of this by sector together. Data visualizations and infographics are great. There are a number of free online tools that you can use for students to create visualizations or infographics. My favorite is Canva, C-A-N-V-A. And although some components have a cost, I make all kinds of stuff and I've never paid them a penny. So it's very easy to use, and it's online, so you don't have to download the software. Find articles that align with it. Find simulations that might mirror what you would do in the classroom, other multimedia, blogs and podcasts, websites. So now here's my learning objective, and here's my disorganized list of ways for my students to learn more about it, right? Just brainstorm, brain dump, pull all of these resources together. Now, once you have this plethora of resources, look at them and think, what piece of this learning objective is not easily available online? That's the only spot where you need to make your own unique content. That's where you might make a little webcast. So you can use Zoom, which right now Zoom has eliminated the 40-minute cap on free accounts for educators. So if you use your school email address, you get the 40-minute limit waived. But like I'm using Zoom right now with you, if you have nobody in there and you push record, it will record it for you and give you the little video. You can also use Screencastify. I believe that they have a discount code right now for teachers to get the premium access for a month for free. So you can create like little mini lessons using some screencasting equipment, but not where something already exists in the world, right? So that's why it's really helpful for you to get those bigger ideas and brainstorm resources first. And then you go, well, I don't feel like any resource really covers this part of the topic enough. That's where you can plug in your own unique curriculum piece. Now, you might be saying, where am I going to get all of these resources? There are 15 different sectors and nobody else teaches this singular course that I teach. And so what I'm going to do, hold on, let me go back. That didn't click through. I want to share with you two resources actually today. So first I'm going to share with you CTE Online. I don't know, is this new? How many of you, if you can either put in the chat or you can raise your hand in the little under more, under your name, how many of you have not looked at CTE Online before? Just curious if this is new. You also maybe focus on other things you might see. So hopefully you're familiar with CTE Online. But I just want to remind you of this resource because, and I've actually, they're about to launch a new, the website relaunch. And so it might look new and different when you're there in the next few months. I reached out to them and I suggested that they add a filter down here, a new filter that would be something that's appropriate for distance learning. And so they're totally excited and planning to add a little button off to the side for distance learning or virtual learning opportunities when they launch their new site. So hopefully we'll be able to filter them a little bit easier. But let's think, what did we, I think somebody said they teach entrepreneurship. So let's go ahead and pull up, that's in business and finance, right? So let's see, if I just search that, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see lesson plans, I'm going to see outlines, and I'm going to see projects. So right now we don't want to see outlines. Outlines are what we use to create new courses. So next time you get tapped on the shoulder to update your course outline, come on down to CTE Online and check out the outlines. But today we're really looking for lesson plans and projects. There are 124 lesson plans and 18 projects here. And so what you can do is pick, let's say, here's a communication skills project that might be helpful. Projects, the way they are built in CTE Online is they have this kind of funky little game board that they start out with. And then if you click on any of these modules, what you'll get is a whole lesson here on where they came from. There's a movie resource. There's, in this particular one, which I did not pick ahead of time, I just opened different ones. But here we have some topics for teachers. There's a student sheet. So all of these Word documents you can download and then you can use them in your learning management system to give to students. And so, you know, before you go and try to make some brand new something about speech in this particular case or public speaking, here are, you know, something around communication styles and things like that. But if you just look at that curriculum page, you'll see, you know, a lot of different options that you might be able to kind of, you know, you're going to have to self-curate and peruse. A lot of times the ones with a photo in the picture are going to be perhaps a something that people worked on enough that they put a photo behind it. So it might be higher quality. Here's a website design integrated project. So you can kind of go through and click on, all right, here's a way to do build a web page, and there will be some resources here as well. So CTE Online is an amazing resource for curriculum. This is not just for CTE, and what you can see is although all the industries are listed here, there's also K-12 subjects. And one of the wonderful things about CTE Online is it really supports integrated work. And so even when you go back to the classroom, if you're looking to work, let's say with your math teacher on something, you can send them to this site and then they can pull up, oh, there's a math lesson associated with crime scenes or chicken co-ops or your cell phone skin, right? So this is a place for, as CTE teachers, for us to pull in and also be able to connect with our core academic teachers, depending on where your school is and if you're looking to do some of that integrated work. The other piece, which I don't have up here right now, but the CTE Distance, hopefully you've all found that, and that's probably where you signed up for this webinar. And we post everything here, our webinars and registration and things like that. After, there's probably going to be 2 weeks in April where we won't have webinars, but instead we're actually going to do course-alike collaboration times. And so we'll have each one of the sectors will have a time where everyone hopefully in our region in that sector can come together and share resources. But in the meantime, as we're trying to curate resources by sector, This particular page, which is under bit.ly/CTE sectors, and I'll go ahead and paste this also into the chat. But this particular page here by sector, this is really important because we know in CTE, we're not one subject. We're literally hundreds of classes across 15 different sectors and a ton of different course pathways. And so here is a place for all CTE people to come and share their knowledge of what works in their particular sector. So let's say one of you is in information communication technologies. I can click that and go down here. And everything that comes across my desk, I try to put in here, but it's also shared publicly so that you can also make changes, add things that you come across that are helpful. And so I encourage you to share what you found that works for you by sector. I will continue to add to these. And as you can see here, there's just like 8 random people in here right now. So hopefully some of them are sharing their resources. But in CTE, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is just that we need resources by every sector separately. And so this is a resource for you. Many of the resources on the original curated page here are more generic. So they might help you with some kind of career exploration or something that covers all of the sectors. As you get down here, we are also including student virtual opportunities. So some of these are national, some of them are local, but you can kind of see right here, there's an international film festival screening they're going to do virtually. We have there's a number of webinars coming up for DHS careers, and then just recommendations for day in the life videos that you might use with your students. So we're trying to add to these as they come up. And then you can see some of these resources here. And if you have other resources or you're looking for anything in particular, shoot me an email so that I can see what I can find. So those are kind of the 2 main resources. But there's a list of resources in a little bit towards the end of this presentation. But at this point, does anyone have any questions while we get into like the actual putting all of these pieces into a cohesive plan? Great. You feel free to shoot into the chat any messages along the way so I can help answer them. All right, so my whole concept for lesson planning in this situation is more of a learning playlist. If you think about a playlist of music, you might pause it and come back to it later. It doesn't all have to happen in a row. It can be a little bit flexible. You might mix this, push shuffle and try them in a different order sometimes, depending on your songs. And so really just think about the playlist, what needs to be right after another, what might be flexible and things like that. Usually we organize learning into units, which might be like 3 to 6 weeks long. That's a really hard thing to bite off for a student. So if you can almost come up with weekly chunks, and that's one of the things that the Department of Education is recommending is chunking learning. But if you can kind of come up with these chunks of learning each week, it becomes a little bit less daunting for you and for your students. So think about that big list of ideas that you came up with already, that brainstorm, and then how would you put it into like a mixtape or a weekly playlist? It's really important to be clear though, what does accountability look like for each thing? And are there routines, even when we're not in the classroom, that we can incorporate along the way? And finally, not just that accountability for the assessment as far as like check-ins, but how are you going to assess? How will you give a grade, and how do students know that? These are all really important things to consider. As you're also thinking about your playlist and these routines that you could pull, these are things like we talked about, synchronous learning and asynchronous, right? So all at the same time or whenever you want kind of learning. Incorporating project time. Do you need to help students understand some foundational concepts? Is there time for them to apply their learning? What about a simulation or online activity? Opportunities to build their own portfolio, whether that's creating something that is a portfolio piece or building the structure of the portfolio itself. And you can look at things like LinkedIn or other online portfolios in your sector for more guidance there. You can also offer office hours, particularly on any day you're not having a synchronous opportunity, that you say, okay, from this hour to this hour, I'll be available, shoot me an email, or I'll be in the Zoom, whatever it is that's going to work for you. You can also have message boards. Mostly learning management systems have message board opportunities. You might put together a Padlet or a Flipgrid, a Kahoot, a Pear Deck. These are all fancy technology terms for activities that you might do in the classroom with your students. And then also career exploration and career readiness activities are an awesome thing to plug in once a week or even as you begin. So right now, if you haven't started having really direct learning time with students, consider that first week focusing on some career exploration so that you're getting used to the interface, your students are getting used to the routines, and then you can move into the more technical skill development in week 2 once you're more comfortable with the online learning platform. So just think about phasing in. And as you watch other people, you'll see people saying things like, plan for half as much as you normally would, or a third of as much, because again, your students are asked to do these in all of their classes. So you can't just Zoom all day. It's not great for them. Here's an example of a weekly routine. You don't need to follow this. And if everyone at your site is having everything due on Friday, consider shifting your routine from Wednesday to Wednesday, right? Because you don't want every single thing that your kids are doing to be due on Friday every week, because that's pretty overwhelming as well. So you can shift these days, but maybe at the beginning of whatever your week plan is, you're hosting a virtual class, you introduce the topic. You could even do something like this where you're giving a little slideshow, talk about your objectives for the week, answer questions. Maybe the next day, the students have kind of guided exploration of resources. They might have a digital assignment. Flipgrid, like I said, is one of my favorite interfaces. And so Flipgrid's a great, you basically pose a little question and then everyone has to answer with a video. And our kids are way into videos right now. So Flipgrid's a kind of a fun way that you could almost replicate TikTok, which is a place where they're spending a lot of their time. They could work on a project or an online activity. And as you see here, none of these things on this Tuesday example had any synchronous learning. So that would be an opportunity for you to host office hours that day at some point. Maybe on Wednesday, this is a day where you are trying to help students interact with each other. So using a message board or in Zoom, I don't know if you know, but you can actually do breakout rooms and break your attendees into smaller groups and then they can talk to each other. You might use something like Pear Deck, which takes a Google Slides and it has like little interactive drag and drop or questions within all the slides. So you can run a Pear Deck with your students. Kahoot is kind of like a digital quiz on their device so they can answer as they go. Padlet is kind of like a board where they're putting digital sticky notes up. And so you can kind of have different questions and have answers under that. And then this link right here goes to a list of EdTech tools that our EdTech team did a presentation with some CTE instructors that they recommended. So this might be a nice place for you to start if you're kind of new to all these technologies. Also, our EdTech team has office hours every morning and is also doing a number of webinars. So if you're looking for help in the realm of like all these little mini tools, there's tons out there, so take advantage of it. And feel free to email me if you're looking for a direct link to what they're doing. On Thursday, maybe you're having them apply their learning, online simulation or activity. Maybe they're creating a little video or an infographic. You can host office hours. And then on Friday, getting into project work time, maybe project work time, have some deadlines. One thing you can do is plan that every week, at least once, you're having kind of like a small group or one-on-one check-in with the students who may have IEPs or language concerns or who are struggling, just so that you have that extra touch point with them. Now, I put together this little lesson planning template, very simplistic, but it's just a place for you to start if you're kind of lost in this whole thing. So here might be a whole week. You can put your course. This would be a great document for you to do your plan. And then from here, you could cut and paste that into your learning management system, which might be like Blackboard or Canvas. Those are all, or Google Classroom. Now, let's say you have none of those. You could just create this and give it out to your students, because that would be, you know, better than just, you know, I don't know, then it sets out the clarity for the students for the week, if that makes sense. So here every day, there's what they should turn in, what's due that day, what their objectives are for that day, any activities, links and resources, and then, okay, we did an activity. As a student, what does that mean to me? When am I turning that in? When's it due? And hopefully in links and resources, you would have perhaps a rubric or something that helps them understand how they will be assigned a grade. So you're welcome to make a copy of this if you're looking for just something to wrap your mind around lesson planning. This obviously is not CTE specific. This is something that any teacher could use just to start getting their mind around how they're going to set up their class for a given week. Like I said, if you are finding that everything your students are doing for all their classes is due on a Friday, consider making this first day, you know, Wednesday and the last day Tuesday. So it doesn't have to be particularly in this order, if that makes sense. All right, any questions at this point as we go? All right, I will keep on keeping on. So what I did as far as accessibility, when we're talking about students with IEPs or 504 plans, obviously you want to consult with your district office. The language here is actually cut and paste from the California Department of Education. We do need to be very aware of who our students are under that category. So, you know, I know it's late in the year and you may have, you know, a drawer somewhere in your classroom that has all of the IEPs and 504s. If you don't know which of your students have these accommodations needed, you know, go ahead and you can reach out to your administration. It's probably in your student information system, like where you take roll. So first, make sure that you have in mind who these students are. And if they have an accommodation that can be accommodated virtually, make sure you're following that, whether that's extra time on assignments or classes or those kinds of things. Also, as you're building your work in Canvas or whatever your learning management system is, you might not realize that using things like heading styles that's at the top. So like if you go here, I'll just show you how I even use them here. If I am looking at this right here, this piece of my document is actually heading 3. All right, so you see this in Word, you see this in Google, you see this pretty much anywhere. And you might not use that very often. I really like to use it because that actually gives me, it lets me have this little table of contents up here that follows everything. But what this means is when somebody with a screen reader is looking at this, it reads it differently because it says, oh, here's a heading, here's a heading. So when we talk about accessibility, one of the things we can do is have headings. Also, any images you put, you can add what's called alt text to them, and that's just a description of the image, and that helps the screen reader read it. So those are some simple things that we can do, particularly if you have students who need accommodations in order to interact with something online. You can also have transcripts of video or audio. You may not know, but anything you upload to YouTube, YouTube will automatically add closed captioning to it. And so that is a resource. It's not the best closed captioning because it doesn't have capitalization and punctuation, but it is an improvement and allows for more accessibility for all of our students. All right, so continue to monitor. There's a lot of resources on accessibility. So if you have particular students you're concerned about, make sure that you're talking to your district, or you can look up resources specifically about accessibility from both the Department of Education. Our County Office of Education has some additional resources that I know are coming out this week. So keep an eye out. That is definitely at the forefront of everyone's mind. All right, so we looked at CTE Online and we looked at our CTE Distance page. But if you have not seen a lot of these other resources, take a look particularly if it's aligned to your sector, and you'll find a lot of great things. UCCI is not particularly digital necessarily, the University of California Curriculum Integration, but because they have the full course description and all resources in the course description, you can just kind of steal all their ideas and plug them into what you're doing. So for instance, so if we want to look at maybe some electives that are maybe CTE, actually, let's go over to the industry sector here, which is just a different way to organize the same thing. So let's say you're agriculture, and so you're like, oh, biology and sustainable agriculture, that sounds interesting to me. So you click on here. You can find all of the course units and assignments. Some of them might be helpful in a virtual learning experience. It's not built for that. But the nice thing is that there's lesson planning materials. And so you can actually click through, that was a different organization than they usually have, course materials. So you can see some of the assignments and resources will be listed in the description. So as you go through, you'll find links. So again, kind of like CTE Online, as you peruse here, you'll find digital resources that you can plug into your lessons and perhaps some ideas of getting a little bit more creative with your lessons. All right, and I'm trying to make these as short as I can because I know we are all over Zoomed. So if you have any questions, let me know. And I did not update my upcoming webinars slides, but you can actually find those on our CTE Distance website. Today's webinar was a repeat of last week's, and I apparently did not update my final slide. Apologies for that. And so this is where you'll find those upcoming webinars again. And what do we have coming up next? Tomorrow, I actually have this whole talk on helping students find their purpose. It's kind of my go-to. I do it at a lot of conferences. It has a ton of digital resources, but definitely more around the career exploration. So if you are interested in that, I would love to see you tomorrow, or at least you can come back and watch the video later. If you are particularly a San Diego person and you want to go to this work-based learning training, it also gets you access to, every time we have industry partners who are offering work-based learning experiences, then you'll be on the list of people who's eligible for that. So you can get your work-based learning training done virtually now. And then if you've ever wanted to do some student conferences, we're doing a webinar on that next week, and also one on career assessments and labor market data. And I'll probably have one or two more that I add in to the schedule next week. If you have any topics that you would like a webinar on, I'm all ears. I will probably make one specifically on whatever it is you're looking for. And so please reach out and let me know what would be most helpful. And at this point, I'll just open it up to questions if there are any. And everyone is on mute, so feel free to unmute if you have any questions. All right, but otherwise, it's been great. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully these were helpful as you get into distance learning.
Thank you, Jewyl. It's good. You answered a lot of questions.
Awesome. That's what I want to hear. And also, I do have daily office hours at 1 o'clock. So you can just log in and ask random questions or get feedback or whatever it is that you're looking for. Let me know.
Super. Thanks so much.
And that weekly schedule is actually just the slides are all right here. So I see in the notes, Brian asked about the schedule. So I did put the sample lesson planning template linked here, and it's also in the slide deck. So if you go into the slide deck and you're looking for just this is in that slide deck, which I can, that link, sorry, is back on the other page. But if you're looking for the lesson planning template, that's linked in the slides and also on the distance learning site.
You have those access to that?
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just email me if there's anything you can't find.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.